Welcome to Beyond LIHTC, a session on discussing how potentially we can pair other tax credit types with LIHTC to help, fund your project. So my name is Keith Burgess. I'm with BBVA Compass. I manage the Community Development Capital team. We're based in Houston. We operate across 7 states across the Sun Belt region, but Texas is our largest state that we're primarily focused on. So definitely most happy to be here. So this morning, what I'll do is let me just, give you the sort of the ground rules and the plan for the session this morning. So what we're planning to do is really have this open, having it to be a discussion. So the format will be, I'm going to ask the 2 panelists here a few questions and prompts, and we'll have them talk about it. But we'll have you ask questions and interject as well. So we can do this a couple of ways. As you see, there is a mic in the center of the floor there. So if you feel comfortable and you want to come up to the mic and ask a question, please feel free to do so, and you'll be called upon to ask your question on one of these esteemed panelists here. Alternatively, if you're sort of shy and you don't want to walk up there under the lights, I can give you my cell phone number, and you can send me a text. You can text me your questions, and then I'll sort of prompt it that way. So my cell phone number is 713-409-0677. So again, 713-409-0677. So that's an alternative way. Whichever way you feel comfortable. If you have a loud voice and you're way in the back and you raise your hand and you holler it out, that's fine too. So I think those are just basically the rules here. So with that said, and without further ado, let me introduce our panel here. So to my left, we have Ben Dupuy with Enhanced Capital. And then also we have, I better get to my, Aniko Rakita with Churchill Stateside Group. So let me just go ahead and open it up. So Ben, if you would, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your experience with other tax credit types in the marketplace at this point.
Sure, and is this on?
Yeah, it sounds on.
So I'm Ben Dupuy from Enhanced Capital. Thanks for having me here today. So I'll just start with a very brief introduction about what Enhanced Capital is. We've been around for 16 years. We are institutionally backed. We're owned by one of the largest private equity companies that specializes in financial services in the nation. And over the last 16 years, we've monetized about $1 billion worth of tax credit transactions, including new markets tax credits, historic rehab tax credits, energy credits, and a variety of other credits. We have not yet done anything in the LIHTC space, but we're very forward-leaning, and when the right opportunity comes along, I think we'll be happy to get into that market as well. I'm going to be answering a lot of questions, I think, focused on new markets and historics in the panel.
Okay, great. Excuse me. Aniko, same question to you. If you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do in the tax credit space.
Sure. My name is Aniko Rakita, and I'm with Churchill Stateside Group. Our company is a privately owned company based in Clearwater, Florida. I'm based in Dallas, and I cover Texas for both debt and equity origination. As you can see, we have both sides of the transaction. We cover debt. We are a MAP lender, USDA lender. We also provide construction loans. On the equity side, we work with renewable energy, historic tax credits, and our bread and butter is the LIHTC tax credits. We invest both in federal and state tax credits using the LIHTC and the historic tax credit programs. And I'm going to be talking about renewable energy, and Ben and I will both cover historic tax credits.
Excellent. Perfect segue. So, Aniko, please provide us, a little bit more insight to the market for renewable energy tax credits.
Sure. So let me just give you a little bit of a background of renewable energy and where we are in 2016. Renewable energy was created by the Energy Policy Act in 2005, and it was only a one-year credit. Based on the success, it has been extended several times, and the last extension was in 2005. Originally, the credits were to be expired in 2016, so markets started to slow down and everybody was trying to wrap up their activities. But after the extension, we see an increase from investors in the renewable energy markets. So the tax credits have been extended. Right now, tax credits can be claimed 30% of the qualifying expenses. Based on a step-down process, they will go down to 10%. So everything after 2023 will have a permanent 10% tax credit on it.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. So can you, I guess, explain how potentially would you see renewable energy tax credits incorporated potentially in a LIHTC project?
We have seen several ways where renewable energy can be beneficial for both the developer, the cities, the counties, and also the tenants. These renewable energies, the most common type is solar energy. So when we combine solar energy, most developers are trying to reduce their operating expenses. And the systems can help, but not totally eliminate operating expenses. So they can help provide the energy for common spaces, and cover some part of the operating expenses. We have seen several successful programs in California, Massachusetts, and Washington, D.C., where there are certain rebate programs that developers can use and build solar rooftop systems and help reduce their operating expenses. Unfortunately, here in Texas, I am not aware of any programs, and I was going online and I found this report card for Texas, and it doesn't really look good. We got a D. So we have plenty of ways to improve in renewable energy and the way Texas handles renewable energy. One way where we got a big red F on this report is net metering. And net metering basically helps the surplus energy that's created using the solar systems. You sell it back to the utility providers and get certain incentives from them, and you can pass that on through to your tenants.
So probably one of the most likely ways then in a LIHTC project would be to incorporate some sort of solar element to that to help reduce the operating expenses, the utility expenses then.
That is correct. That is the most common use of renewable energy. We have seen mostly solars. Recently, there's a movement where you can build community solar, where if you don't have enough roof space on your affordable housing project, a couple affordable projects can come together and find larger roof spaces, and they can utilize that as a community. They can utilize those solar savings and also the tax credits.
Okay, so I guess walk us through a simple example of how that credit would be monetized. Do you have a typical investor like what developers would be used to seeing in an affordable housing transaction?
Sure. So these credits are based on the cost of the solar systems. 30% of the system can be used as a tax credit. It's a one-on-one tax credit, and it can be claimed against the federal corporate income taxes. For the commercial type projects, like a multifamily project, they will be claimed in the year where the project is placed in service. There are several eligible expenses, and I will have to look at my cheat sheet so I tell you the right expenses. So obviously the cost of the solar panels, installation, transformers, and any energy storing devices. So those are the eligible expenses, and as I mentioned, they can be used in the year the project is placed in service. There's no cap on the amount of tax credits that can be used, so that's a good thing. And these systems are also benefit from the accelerated depreciation. So that's also helping from the accounting point of view.
So what have you seen to be some of the challenges in incorporating, the renewable energy credits into an affordable housing transaction? You have issues with having separate developers? Do you have impacts on bases or anything like that, which could be a potential issue for investors to attract capital?
Well, as the report card says, there's we only got A in property tax exemption, and that's for single-family homes. So multifamily developers here in Texas are facing several different challenges. Utility companies have to partner with these developers. They cannot just put a solar rooftop on their affordable housing project if the utility company is not equipped or they don't have the background in solar. Other states provide incentives of solar energy created. I'm not aware here in Texas. San Antonio and Austin have the most advanced solar utility agreements, but there's still ways to improve. Another good way is to be in this business right now. I think a couple days ago, on the 19th, President Obama just released some information, and he wants to increase renewable energy in affordable housing. So his plan is to increase, and I will get my numbers right, he wants to have a 10-time increase on alternative energy for low and moderate income households. So there's federal support behind it, but you also have to have the state support. Here in Texas, we don't have state income taxes. In states where there's state income, they can be beneficial, these solar credits. Yes? Hi.
How does it, when do you claim do you show the credits in your sources and uses when you're applying for tax credits? How do you capture that into your development cost?
It's a 5-year credit, but it is claimed in the year but it's a 5-year compliance period, and it is in your sources and uses. But it can be only offset by the cost of the solar systems. But it is part of the sources and uses in the budget.
So Aniko, so when you're monetizing that, so in terms of, I guess, from an affordable development perspective, there's always some price per credit. So I know we can't necessarily get into, exact pricing or anything, but, here in Texas, there's some pretty aggressive pricing. And I'm guilty of this as well as an investor, paying over $1 for credits. And if you explain that to people and say, okay, so why would you pay $1.10 to only get $1 in credits? It doesn't seem to make sense. Is it the same thing happening there, or is the credits priced at a discount to the price per credit discounted to the actual credits received by the investor? What do you see there?
Pricing for the solar credits is over $1.
Ooh.
So we have seen, and I'll just give you a ballpark, 110, 130-ish pricing. It also depends on the location, and here comes all the "it depends" clauses. It depends on the location, the size of the project, the amount of tax credits that can be claimed. Our company, for example, focuses more on solar farms just because of the economies of scale and the amount of tax credits that we can sell. And they're not even comparable in size to what a multifamily project can use. These multifamily systems are about 250 kilowatts, and the solar farms that investors are really interested in right now are 6, 7, 10 megawatts. So the size is just not even comparable. What we see is most of the time the federal tax LIHTC investor buys these tax credits as an add-on. The market for these tax credits is not super competitive just because they're just a small amount in your sources and uses. The last project that I have looked at had only 60,000 total in equity. So
in terms of, I guess, from the question regarding the development budget, so in terms of what you would see is you would have a letter of intent or commitment to buy those credits at some price. And so let's say if it were $100,000 worth of credits and you were going to pay $1.30 for the credits, then you would have $130,000 of equity that you would be able to show as a source in your development budget. Then that's one thing, and when we talk about credits, oftentimes we sort of use the term credits within the sources and uses, but really it's the monetization of those credits that show up in the sources and uses there. So that's what a developer would be looking for, is that final price per credit to include in their sources and uses.
right.
Does that answer the question?
You would have to show up with your permanent sources. You couldn't use it during construction because you can't claim it till you build it.
That is correct, yes.
That's right. So you would need to bridge that. Obviously, you would need some financing to bridge that and show up as a
Yes.
permanent source, right?
Yes.
Very good.
Is it usually the case that it would be the same investor that would purchase the energy credits as the LIHTC?
Yes, in LIHTC projects, usually that is the case.
Yeah, I would confirm for ourselves. I think it makes it a lot easier for, I think, the developer. For ourselves, it's a small amount. Typically what we see is an add-on credit, and so we'll typically gladly purchase that. So I want to sort of, we've been having very good discussion here, but Ben has been quiet, and so we want to get him involved here very shortly around his area of expertise. So you mentioned that there's a 5-year compliance period. So are there any types of guarantees that, like in the LIHTC world, as an investor, we look for guarantees coming from our sponsors? Are there any guarantees that investors are requiring of developers related to that compliance period?
It is usually the same type of guarantees, like low-income housing tax credits, completion guarantee, just to make sure the systems are in place and operational, so we can claim those tax credits once the placed in service and COs are acquired. So it's a similar structure as LIHTC.
Okay, and then so 5-year period, is it sort of a straight line, sort of in terms of, is there a recapture over that 5-year compliance period, and how does that work?
Yes, there could be a recapture, but only if the project goes bankrupt or if the company that claims the tax credits go bankrupt. Throughout the history of these tax credits, we haven't seen any project that had to give back these credits or for us, this is a relatively low risk type of investment. As long as the solar panels are functioning and operational, there couldn't be any issues.
Okay, very good. So it sounds like there's some promise, especially in the world of affordable housing.
This is a modern question. What's required on the part of the developer once they put in this, solar system? Does it take a special type of maintenance, or are there any added costs to maintaining the solar system?
Yes, there are maintenance costs, but what we have seen is they're minimal and they are offset by the savings that the solar energy provides in terms of the electricity used by the building.
Okay, very good. Any other questions? Yes.
What's the average size of the award?
It is not a competitive tax credit. So you can claim any amount. There's no limit on the amount as long as it is based on qualifying expenses and it is used to build solar rooftops or panels.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay.
Is that credit claimed immediately? Is it spread out like a typical LIHTC credit, or is it a one-time, just on the initial tax return?
Yes, it's a one-time.
Right.
And what do you do about, have you seen a deal in Texas where somebody's actually submitted a tax credit application and plans to use the solar panels? I'm wondering what you do about tenant utilities and utility costs on your applications.
I have not seen any transactions in Texas. I have seen transactions in California, and they have specific underwriting for the solar transactions where they have allocated a certain percentage of expenses that will be offset by the solar energy. And this program, there's not a historical data out there as of yet if they really offset that amount or not. At least at the last conference in California, they were not sure if the numbers that they're using were correct, but they do see the advantages of the solar systems. And of course in California they have other incentives and rebates for multifamily renewable energy projects, so they can get a rebate from the utility companies to construct these systems. I think it's a 30% rebate right away that helps construction costs.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so we're going to move now to talk about New Markets Tax Credit Program a little bit here. So Ben, so I understand that the New Markets Program was extended, I think, toward the end of 2015. And so tell us about how long that program was extended for, and what do you think this will mean to the industry?
Sure. So the New Markets Tax Credit is a credit that was enacted at the end of 2000 to encourage more private capital investment in economically distressed neighborhoods. Its initial authorization was 5 years, and since then it's been renewed in 1 and 2 year spurts. At the end of 2015 was the first time it's been extended for a period longer than 2 years, and it was a 5 year extension. And interestingly, the Treasury Department, which allocates this credit to community development entities, had gotten backlogged, and so for the first time in the program's history, they've consolidated 2 years of awards into one. Typically 3.5 billion per year is allocated to CDEs. This year, at the end of this year, around November or December, the Treasury Department plans to allocate $7 billion worth of allocation. So it's a very momentous occasion within the new markets industry, and for projects that are seeking new markets allocation, now is an ideal time to be in the market.
Wow. So we have a long extension, 5 years. So do you think that will lead to making this program permanent, like the LIHTC?
I'm hopeful, and the whole industry is hopeful that will be the case. One way to look at it is it's an extra 5 years to convince Congress to make it permanent before it ceases to exist. It gets deauthorized. So it's a critical time for that. Also, about 6 or 7 weeks ago, the House Ways and Means Committee in Congress released what they're calling their blueprint for tax reform, and unfortunately, it calls for eliminating all credits including LIHTC and new markets and historic. So that does create some headwinds. I mean, it's a long way between that plan showing up on paper and actually getting enacted. The presidential election will have something to say about that. Congressional elections will have something to say about that. But it's a tough time for all credits, and all credits need to be making their best case to be extended.
Okay, great. Okay, so we're talking about $7 billion that should be allocated by the end of this year, and then $3.5 billion for the remaining 3 years.
Correct.
So another $10.5 million. So roughly, 17 million or so, 17.5 million, something like that. Okay. Billion. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. Billion with a B. That's right. Billions. That's right.
And I think a very important point for folks who haven't really studied new markets tax credits yet, often the first thing that creates some confusion is the difference in terminology between allocation and actual tax credits. So I'll take a sample project that you might have $10 million in total project costs. So that project would seek a $10 million new markets tax credit allocation. That $10 million in allocation translates into $3.9 million in tax credits. And the way that's calculated is it's a 7-year credit. And so for the first 3 years, it's a 5% credit. And the last 4 years, it's a 6% credit. So it totals 39% over those 7 years.
That's a very good point. And related to that is oftentimes when we hear about selling LIHTC, we hear about equity. Is that exactly the case in new markets tax credits? Do you really have equity into the transaction? How does that play out?
It's a little bit different. New markets tax credits create what's called it's an equity-like capital infusion. So it's not technically equity. And I wish I had a chart to
No, you don't really, because if you've ever seen one of those new markets charts, it will get you messed up for a while. So we don't want to do that. It's too early.
I'll simplify it as much as possible, but basically, let's take a sample $10 million project that's going to use $10 million of allocation. You're typically going to have, and I should mention, in speaking about new markets, there's no single way that these deals get done. It's not set in stone that deals have to get done the way I'm about to describe. I'm describing what's typical. So in a $10 million project, you might have an A loan and a B loan, and so the A loan might cover $7.5 million, and that might be at a normal rate of interest. The B loan is going to be substantially discounted. And that's what's creating this equity-like piece. So that $2.5 million in this B loan, it might come into the project at a 1% interest rate, and then at the end of the 7-year compliance period, the investor might put it for about $1,000. So in a new markets capital structure, that $2.5 million that's coming in through the B loan gets treated like equity. It's not exactly equity, but it gets treated like equity, and it will show up in the sources and uses and
okay.
Banks that act as the lenders for that A piece, that $7.5 million piece. They have comfort. If they're getting into a deal, they've got comfort with it at that point on how to treat the equity-like piece.
So, who actually applies for the new markets tax credit or the allocation, if you would, and just describe that process? Who actually controls those allocations?
Sure. So the new markets tax credit is very different from LIHTC or historics in this regard. The Treasury Department awards the allocations to community development entities, and community development entities can be nonprofits, for-profits. They can be sponsored by a local or state government. You can have private companies doing it. Like for example, Enhanced Capital, we're a large new markets tax credit allocatee. We've won awards of about $350 million. We won a $65 million award in the last round. But there's a broad variety of entities that are CDEs, and a few guys in an afternoon could form one if you had the right qualifications. So it's not easy to form one, but it does become very competitive when you apply to the Treasury Department for this allocation. Once a year, the Treasury Department opens up an application process, and CDEs are scored. It's a very rigorous application. It takes applicants, weeks to put it together. But you're scored on your management experience, your capitalization strategy, your community development strategy. Those CDEs that meet the qualifications in terms of their management and ability to raise capital get evaluated on their plan to impact low-income communities. So if a CDE had prior experience in some other capacity, maybe it's from a different economic development capacity or a different tax credit capacity, the Treasury Department wants to understand how that CDE plans to act as a steward on behalf of the government to find the projects in which to deploy that allocation responsibly and in a way that's going to have maximum impact in those low-income communities. So, the metric that's most commonly used for community impact is job creation. How many jobs is this project going to create? And it's not just construction jobs. It's primarily how many permanent jobs in a low-income neighborhood is that project going to support? And there are other metrics. You can have health centers, healthy food markets, co-working spaces. But at the end of the day, for projects, for CDEs to be competitive with the Treasury Department, they need to communicate how they're going to strive to make sure that this capital is supporting low-income communities.
Okay.
And I think another point you probably wanted to get to is, I'm sorry, I'm late in getting to it, but once the CDEs are awarded this allocation, and only about 1 in 5 CDEs wins an award, it's up to those CDEs to work with projects and developers to evaluate those projects and decide which projects are going to get allocation and at what level. So whereas the states act as the administrators of the federal LIHTC, here you've got the Treasury Department awarding allocation to these CDEs, and then it's entirely up to the CDEs to make their decisions as to which projects are going to get allocation.
That's exactly right. So it's a Texas two-step process, right? So you have these CDEs who then apply to the CDFI fund, which is part of the Treasury, to get this ability to sub-allocate, if you would, to various projects. So it's a very important point that rather than the developer going straight to the state, like with LIHTC, you go to the CDE, goes to the Treasury, their CDFI fund, to get that authority. Then what are the rules around that CDE then having to deploy that capital into low-income communities?
Sure. The New Markets Tax Credit is fairly flexible in terms of what it can do. There are, where you start off is there are some prohibited classes of businesses that can't be invested in. They're called the sin industries. It's things like casinos and racetracks and tanning salons, things
all the
like
good stuff. Yeah.
Packaged liquor stores. So after you get past that list, it's a fairly broad range of options where the allocations can be deployed. They can go into to nonprofits. They can go into for-profit businesses. Almost everything under the sun has been done. Manufacturing, housing, which we'll spend some more time on in a minute. Just the list of types of projects that have gotten allocation is very long. Hotels can get them, office space, groceries, retail. So, on housing, I think most of this group is going to be interested in how new markets and housing can be put together. So, the important point to start off with is that the same borrower cannot be in a LIHTC deal and a new markets deal at the same time. The borrower can't get LIHTC credits and new markets credits for the same project. Now, what happens is a lot of times, let's say you had a plan that envisions using LIHTC for your affordable housing component, and then separately there's another component that would be eligible for new markets tax credits. If those projects are condoed separately, then you're in the realm of being able to make it work.
So the projects can be condoed separately, but they can be still within the same legal entity?
Well, I think to be safe, you would want to make them into separate legal entities.
They would be separate, right?
So
a good example would be let's say we have a multi-story building, 5-story building, and on the first, and let's say the floors 2 through 5 would be your LIHTC project for, let's say it's a senior LIHTC project. And then on the first floor, you decided to put in some health and community service space that could potentially, that would be qualified under the New Markets program. Is
Right.
that a type of structure that you could potentially see
That would
this
work.
working with?
That would
Right.
work. And you know, you let's say you had a New Markets tax credit project that wasn't even going to have any LIHTC associated with it. You can still have residential housing under the right circumstances in that project. The first test you have to meet is what's called the 80-20 rule. And so if you have a project that's going to have residential housing in it, at least 20% of the annual income needs to come from non-residential sources. So, you know, rents from other uses. And then also, if you have a project that's going to use New Markets for any type of residential housing, at least 20% of those units need to be affordable.
Okay. So any questions at this point? Okay. Yes.
Is the housing, if the housing was a program that would probably not qualify as LIHTC, would that be viewed commercially under New Markets conditions? I'm thinking
yeah.
about permanent supportive housing stuff with treatment pieces in it that might have treatment beds for relapse prevention or going back into structure before going back into the independent qualified LIHTC housing.
I think it could work if it met the two tests that I just went. Yeah, like if first it has to meet that 80-20 test, so that 20% of the project's rental revenue needs to come from non-residential sources. So perhaps there's some kind of healthcare component that's going to generate 20% of the income of that project. And then the second piece is at least 20% of the residential units need to be affordable.
Okay.
There's another question.
Oh.
So you mentioned that New Market tax credits come in as a low interest loan, but treated as quasi-equity. How does the entity actually record those? Do they record them as a loan on their books, or do they record it as equity?
It would be recorded as a loan.
As a loan?
So what you have is when the CDE makes a loan down to the project, that's called the QualicB, the Qualified Area Low-Income Community Business, it is considered true debt. So the documentation that you will see is that CDE is the lender and that QualicB is the borrower. So when the financial statements for the QualicB gets prepared, you will see two loans, what they call QualicI loans, Qualified Low-Income Community Investments, and that's the dollars that's flowing from CDE down to the project, if you would, that QualicB. So yes, that would be booked and recorded as a loan. Interest accrues on that, and has been saying that you have the A note, which has to be repaid, and then you have the B note, most likely, which will be it depends on the scenario, but what happens at the end of the 7-year compliance period, there's a put option so the QualicB has a put option to acquire the investor interest from the CDE. And then so what you end up with is you have a QualicB who has ownership of the entity that made the loan. And so now you have a loan to yourself, and at the end of the 7 years, if you're a nonprofit, you could quite easily forgive the loan. There's no taxable event. If you're a for-profit entity, there may be some other tax considerations, and you should, consult tax counsel. So that's my disclaimer there. And then you figure out, okay, do we just leave that loan outstanding? Because sometimes those loans will actually have, 20 to 30-year terms as well. So yeah, it is actually recognized as true debt until that, unwind of the new market structure at the end of the compliance period.
Kevin used the term quality that I don't think we explained yet, but when he said we don't want to see any charts, there's a lot of unique terminology with the new markets tax credit. So the term he was using, quality, is qualified active low income community business.
There you go. So and so let's go through. So in fact, that's one of the questions I wanted to address as well, is the all the players within that. Since we're we don't have a chart, but let's just talk through the players. Let's start upper tier and then work down through the quality B.
Sure. So there are 4 primary participants in a new markets tax credit transaction, and they would be the developer, the leveraged lender, which is providing this A loan we've been talking about, and then on the B loan side, you primarily have the CDE and the new markets tax credit investor. And so at the upper tier, I've described earlier that there's this 39% tax credit that's outstanding, that's claimed over 7 years. So the first step in the process is the allocation is awarded to the CDE by the Treasury Department. Then the CDE works with all these entities to actually monetize the credit and have it impact the project. So once the CDE has found the business it's going to work with to deploy the allocation into, and it works with the bankers and the investors to monetize the credits and get it into the structure. So let's take this $10 million example. $10 million project size, $10 million of allocation. That's going to generate a $3.9 million tax credit. So the CDE works with the investor to monetize that $3.9 million of credits. That $3.9 million of credits is not $3.9 million today. It's a cumulative 3.9 over 7 years. So in order for that to be monetized and brought forward to today, so that it can be part of the sources and uses of the project, they're discounted. So let's just say it's just easy numbers. Let's say it's 80 cents on the dollar. That 3.9, let's say it's almost 4 million, becomes almost 2 million, and so that 2 million is what creates the B loan, and that would be paired up with $8 million of the A loan from the leveraged lender. The leveraged lender is just it's the unique term here used for basically the banker providing market rate loan.
Okay.
That's
okay.
Like we've alluded to it a couple times. The structures and the charts can be very they can be very complex, but we're just boiling it down to its essence. So anything else you want me to touch on there?
Well, let me ask you. So how does a developer get the attention of the CDE and the investor? Because there's 2 folks that your project has to really appeal to.
Sure. So the more that a project speaks to community impact, the more it's going to be attractive to the new markets tax credit industry. And when I say the industry, I'm talking about both the community development entities as well as the investors. So a project that is thinking about community impact just as a total afterthought, and you're saying, I hear there's this new markets tax credit out there, and if I say I'm going to create a bunch of jobs, I'll be attractive. That a project like that might have a tough time actually attracting investment. But if you start from the beginning, and you say, look, I'm building this, call it hotel, in the middle of a city, and I'm going to partner with a nonprofit, and that nonprofit is going to make a significant effort to do job training in the hospitality industry, and we're going to have a whole syllabus for our trainees, and there's going to be a very rigorous education program that lasts a couple of years, and they're going to be graduated on to higher paid, higher quality jobs. That's the kind of project that can get the attention of CDEs and investors. And in fact, I'm talking about a project that we just did in Houston with a hotel. A hotel by itself, without those job training efforts, is not going to be very attractive. If you were going to build a senior assisted living center that had a health care component to it, if you're going to build a food hall that had a healthy foods component to it, and there are going to be efforts to reach out to the low-income community and make that healthy food available to people that wouldn't otherwise have access to it. That's going to be attractive. And the same things that attract the CDEs also attract the investors. Everyone wants to be associated with these good projects. The reason this industry, it's in a way, it's kind of self-policing in that the Treasury Department has the minimal rules, but in order to be competitive for winning allocation in the next round that you apply for, you have to document to the Treasury Department that you've kind of gone above and beyond in terms of delivering impact to low-income communities.
So what are the, oh, yes, we have a question.
It sounds like then you really have to do the reverse of the way you explain the process. Doesn't the CDE have to have the deals to prove it can get the tax credit?
Yes, in a way, that's right. So to be competitive, if you're a business that needs new markets tax credit allocation to make your deal work, I would advise that you work with. There are consultants within the industry who have expertise at basically putting a package together that shows how an individual deal is going to impact low-income communities. And also, there's another component of it is you need to show the new markets tax credit industry that project indeed does have a financial gap that needs to be filled with the new markets tax credit subsidy. A point, the new markets tax credit is not designed to make a good deal a more profitable deal, and it's not designed to make a bad deal a good deal. It's designed to help a deal that's stuck on the 80 or 85 yard line get over the goal line. And so it's a little bit of a dance. So it's a lot of, there have been thousands of deals that have been done. A lot of the folks who've done deals before work to do them again, but every year there are new entrants into the space, and it's not a super high barrier to entry. But a project does have to be packaged and just like as if you were going out to a construction lender and building a package to tell your story as to why this project deserves to be funded. It's a similar process with new markets.
Very good. Okay, any other questions on new markets? And we're gonna, as time is winding down here. Time goes by so quickly. We're having fun. Okay, great.
Is there a minimum size that you typically see?
So there's by law there's not a minimum size, but for practical purposes, you'll hear a lot of folks in the industry say that doing deals below 5 or 6 million gets really tough and kind of uneconomical for all parties involved. The deals can be done at smaller amounts, but they're tough. Yes.
In your example with the 10 million in the new market tax credits, and I realize you went through the iterations. What does that actually turn into equity? What was the final number?
Sure. A rough rule of thumb is the actual amount of subsidy that makes it into the project is typically about 25% of the total project size. So you take that 39% credit that's redeemed over the course of 7 years, and there has to be a discount to bring in the investor and a discount that takes into account that they're not realizing their total return for 7 years, and so that 39% effectively becomes close to 25%, and that's also after all the legal and accounting fees that are spent to address the complexities that we referred to.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so lastly then, so what are the unique compliance requirements associated with new markets tax credits?
So the most important compliance requirement is that the business operate for 7 years and be maintained as a qualified low-income community business for that 7 years. So the program is designed to impact low-income communities. You can't have that business be funded in year 1 and then in year 3 it move to a non-qualified census tract. That's pretty much the biggest one. You also want to make sure that the business is going to operate for 7 years. There are instances where a company fails or gets bought and ceases to be a quality B. The rules allow for CDEs to take up to 12 months to redeploy the remaining allocation into another qualified deal for the remainder of that 7 years. So those are the big compliance guidelines.
Okay, very good. Any questions? And then we'll start talking about historics, because Aniko has been, I thought I saw her head nod, but I think she's ready now. So, okay, so Aniko, can you, I guess, share with us your specific role that you've played at your organization using historic tax credits, and let's talk a little bit about that.
So Churchill State Side Group is really active in the historic tax credit market. We invest both in the federal and state historic tax credits. And here in Texas, we're lucky because we do have a state historic tax credit program. And it's fairly new. It was started in 2015, but that's also a great source of funds if you're looking at projects in Texas. Not every state has state tax credit programs for historic tax credits, so unlike the renewable energy, Texas gets a big thumbs up here. Churchill State Side Group also has a debt program for historic tax credit projects. We are trying to help developers through the process of acquiring, rehabbing, doing all this work. So we developed a sort of mini-perm structure that would satisfy the investors for the 5-year compliance period and have the construction and perm loan in place at closing. At the same time, we offer several other loan programs to our borrowers that would be more beneficial for the long term. So we're trying to help them get the project done and find the best programs that would make the project feasible for the long run.
So you provide construction and permanent debt programs. What's unique about the construction debt program as it relates to doing a historic tax credit transaction?
In general, doing historic tax credit transactions, there's just a lot of compliance and regulations involved. You have to make sure that construction is done according to the rules, because if you do something that has not been approved by the National Park Service or Texas State Historical Commission, you will not get the credits. So it has to be done by the book, and there's just a...
So can you, I guess, talk about that here? We talked about the Texas 2-step. Now this is the Texas 3-step here, right? So what's the 3-step process for dealing with historics?
Sure. So historic tax credits have an application process. They're not competitive, but they do have to go through a rigorous application process. First, the projects would have to be qualified as historic buildings, and not only on the federal level. Here in Texas, if you're applying for the state historic tax credits, the building has to be qualified as a Texas, and the right term is registered Texas historic landmark. So you have to comply with both agencies. Once you have this designation, then you have to put together your budget, and the budget has to be approved by both agencies. And once that's done, then comes construction, and the biggest hurdle is to get through Part 3 on the federal side and Part C on the state side, and make sure that everything is done according to the budget and what has been approved. And that's when you get your tax credits, so that's why it's so critical.
Okay, all right, very good. So you're mostly coming from that of a lender standpoint on the historic transaction. So Ben, tell us more about your role in historic tax credits at your firm.
Sure. So we have federal and state historic tax credit funds. We're very active here in Texas. Actually, in 2013, led the effort to build the coalition to create the Texas Historic Credit. I'm from Louisiana. We've had a Louisiana State Historic Credit there for 10 years. So we borrowed a lot of the same concepts and case studies to show how it could be done over here. So something that's unique that we're doing is we're advancing a large part of the state historic tax credit proceeds at financial close. So we pride ourselves on working hard with developers to understand their wants and their needs, and working hard to fulfill them through our access to capital. I mentioned earlier we're owned by a big private equity company and have access to a lot of institutional debt, and so we try to put that to work for our developers and try to be as creative as we can be in making sure they have what they need to get their projects off the ground.
Okay, so it sounds like you guys are effectively a historic tax credit syndicator.
I mean, yes, in the regards that we do end up, we have investors who end up using the credits, but you know, a lot of times we get asked if we're a broker, and we say, well, we can do that piece of the puzzle, but where we're more valuable to developers is coming in on the front end and using our capital to give them the most at the close, so that the sources and uses statement is as heavy as it can be on the proceeds from the credit, and you know, and we try to we can always buy the credits at the back end of the project. That's the easy part. The hard part is making the capital available at the front end, and that's what we work hard to do.
I see. So that seems to be a very, I think, important distinction, because like we were talking about renewables earlier today, it's something where the money doesn't come typically upfront in most transactions. So there needs to be some sort of bridge lending, or in this particular case, it sounds like you're willing to pay in equity. Most historic tax credit investors, most direct bank historic tax credit investors really want to pay in the minimum amount of money required during the construction period. So what's your typical pay-in on just sort of a typical pay-in, equity pay-in structure on a deal?
Sure. I'll start with the federal. Typically, we're paying in 25% of the proceeds at financial close, 25% when the project is placed in service, and then the remaining 50% when the project has its tax credit certificate back from the National Park Service. On the state side, we've done deals everywhere from paying none at the front to all at the back, and on the opposite end of the scale, we've put in 65 or 70% of our state tax credit proceeds at financial close, and then the remainder once the tax credit certificate's back from the state. So we can kind of go all over the map on what a developer needs.
Okay. So Aniko, from your perspective, what have you seen has been the types of projects that lend themselves well to pairing historic tax credits with LIHTC within an affordable housing context?
What we have seen is there's a lot of revitalization going on in our cities today. So old downtowns are transformed into vibrant communities, and that's where we see the most projects using historical tax credits and using those historical buildings and transforming those buildings into rental communities. Working on transactions that also combine the new market tax credits that we have just discussed in a historic downtown setting, where you would have the residential piece on top and the new market tax credit financed commercial piece at the bottom, using a grocery store as an example. So it's a great addition to either the LIHTC or new market tax credits if the building qualifies. These credits can only be used for buildings, so they cannot be used for bridges and other historical landmarks. So we should take the advantage and apply for these historic tax credits.
Okay, so Ben, I guess walk us through that monetization process here. We've talked about sort of how you get at the amount of credits that a project ultimately gets. So walk us through an example on the historic side. What do you see?
Sure. So historic tax credits are a function of the amount of qualified rehabilitation expenditures that a project incurs. So we talked about the three-step process. Part 1/A is getting the building qualified as historic, and part 2/B is getting your rehabilitation plan qualified as historic. Part 3/C is after all of the qualified expenditures have been completed, those figures are totaled, and that's going to generate your total of qualified rehabilitation expenditures. Let me just take a second to talk about what constitutes a qualified rehabilitation expenditure. Acquisition of the building is not a qualified expenditure. Things that are happening outside of the building, like landscape, hardscape, those are not qualified expenditures. Almost everything that you do on the interior of the building, except for FF&E, is a qualified expenditure. So all the hardware, all the systems, so your elevators, escalators, alarm system, HVAC, those are all qualified expenditures. Some of your soft costs, like your architects and consultants and engineers' fees, those are soft costs, and those count toward qualified expenditures as well. Developers can also take a reasonable developer fee as part of the qualified expenditures. So once all those expenditures are totaled together, that's your QRE, qualified rehabilitation expenditures. The federal credit is 20% of those QREs, and the state credit is 25%, and they can be taken together. There's nothing that says they can't be used together. And then when you monetize those, it's going to be a function of those amounts. So,
I have a question. Yes.
If your outside is functionally part of your inside, let's take for example a medical clinic that might help do a little rehabilitation, and you got like an outside track or something like that.
yeah, that would not qualify for historic credits. That could qualify for new markets, but not historic. Because what the historic is focused on is start at the shell of the building and go inside, and it's pretty strict as to what can and can't be counted as a qualified expenditure on the outside.
Okay. So, Aniko, what types of ownership structures are you typically seeing? Are you seeing sort of the single-tier structure like with LIHTC, or are there other types of ownership structures that you see that pass through historics in the transactions that you're looking on, specifically the master lease structure, and what seems to be most prevalent these days?
Maybe Ben should answer this. I'm more on the debt side in our company, so I'm not involved in the equity.
Okay, all right. So Ben,
side.
Sure.
Push it to you.
So an easy way to start this conversation is to say that what's different about the Texas State Historic Credit from the federal historic credit is the Texas State Historic Credit is transferable, which means you can, if a project generates the credit, it can sell it to a buyer like us, just like it could sell, this bottle of water. It's a
certificated credit is what they typically refer to that as. Okay. Yep.
It's property, and it gets bought and sold like any other piece of property. The federal historic credit is not transferable. The credit is earned by the project. And in order for a federal historic tax credit investor to come into the project, contribute capital, and then be allocated the credits for their use, they come in primarily through two different structures. One is called the single tier structure. The other is the master tenant structure. In the single tier structure, the investor becomes the 99% owner of the project for the compliance period, which is a 5-year period. Now, functionally, the developer is still going to control the building and take the vast majority of the economics, but in terms of structuring the deal to be compliant, the investor has to become the 99% owner for that 5-year compliance period. The other structure is called the master tenant structure, and that's a structure used to basically allocate the credits to the investor. It doesn't require the 99% ownership, but it does require a lot of similar partnership agreements and operating agreements, so that the credit can flow to that tenant. The reason that structure is popular is because the IRS said that the tenant of a building can also qualify for the historic credit. So that structure is set up to make the investor the prime tenant in the building. Just last week, the IRS issued some new guidance that will impact how these master tenant structures are set up. It's called the 50D income rule. And
by the way, I'll mention that's why one of our panelists is not here. He's with Cone Resnick, and he was scrambling working on this 50D income rule. So,
right.
So we'll let Ben speak to that further.
Those of you that have been close to the historic tax credit market will remember about 2.5 years ago, the IRS released a new revenue procedure in the wake of the Boardwalk Hall decision that set up some new rules for how deals have to be structured in order to qualify for partnership tax treatment. So that rocked the industry pretty well, and it took a couple months for things to shake out. Longer for some. The new guidance that came out last week is going to cause the industry to reassess how these master tenant structure deals are done. I don't expect the fallout to be as severe as the Boardwalk Hall. I think within a couple weeks, the industry is going to figure out exactly how income needs to be allocated to take care of this new tax treatment. But if you're talking to historic tax credit investors in the next several weeks, you'll be hearing a lot about this 50D issue.
Okay, very good. So we're getting near. We have about 5 more minutes to go. So want to open it up to the floor to see if we have any other questions. Okay, no questions. Okay, so what I'll do is Ben, we'll give you an opportunity to sort of communicate sort of your last thoughts here, and then we'll turn it over to Aniko to let us share her thoughts. But we'll let you go first, and okay. Aniko can close it out.
Okay. Well, I would just say, you've heard a lot about different tax credit structures today. We're very forward-leaning. We work with developers to learn what their needs are and work hard to deliver for them. So we're always glad to talk with developers about their projects to see what we can do to help them.
And before you leave, I think I just would like to ask you to fill out the review forms. Last year, this panel only got 8 feedback forms. So we would like to know what you think about it just for future references. So thank you. You can find us in the marketplace. We do have a booth. And I would be glad to answer any questions about all these tax credits that we talked about today, and also the LIHTC, USDA, and HUD loans that we are offering. We did not mention, but I'm more on the debt side of the company, so even if you're using these tax credit equities, there are corresponding loan programs that also help developers work the green buildings like HUD. Transformation happened recently, and I'm sure that you will learn about it more throughout this conference. But on the debt side, there are also several incentives that help you make these projects work. So come see us at the booth, and thank you so much.
Okay, thank you everybody, and have a good day. And again, remember to fill out those comment forms so that we can improve this panel next year. Maybe we'll do a higher level session if that's what's desired, but please feel free to give us some more feedback. Thank you.